Welcome to the third in a series of 20 devotionals in the Lent in Art devotional series. A visual devotional tells the familiar stories of the Bible in a way that primarily addresses your sense of sight. We want you to see the stories in a new and fresh way, and our talented artists have given us a gift by using their gifts. Levi Bagdanov has a gift, and she is your guide on this journey. Our prayer is that it helps you to see God during this season. In this devotional, there are two basic parts. The first is called the reading. You should approach paintings in the same way you would a book. A book has words that conjure up ideas and images in our head. A painting uses images and is more evocative and striking. The symbols and placement have meaning, and we need to read the meaning. In this part of the devotional, Kelly will provide the needed items of background that will help you to read the painting. The second part is the contemplation. Kelly will give you some guidance, but she really wants you to engage with the painting and let it speak to you. Examine the painting, notice the details, read the accompanying passages of Scripture, and see where the artist is taking the story. And you will be surprised that you experience the story of Jesus in a fresh new way. We cover 20 different paintings in the whole devotional. You can use them however you like. 3 for every week of the Lent season will complete the 20 before Easter. The subject for this video is a painting entitled The Feast in the House of Simon the Pharisee by Peter Paul Rubens and was painted in 1618. Thanks for joining us on this tour of Lenten art. And here's Kelly.
Today in our Lent devotional, we're going to be looking at a work of art by Peter Paul Rubens and Anthony van Dyck, called The Feast of Simon the Pharisee. The painting was completed in Flanders between 1618 and 1620, and it is an oil on canvas. It is a fine example of a Baroque painting, Baroque being a period of art, an era of art that started after 1600 and followed the High Renaissance and Mannerism. And the Baroque artists broke with the traditional Renaissance artists in that they used light very intentionally, dark areas, light areas. They used color very boldly. They tried to create tension and movement within their works, and they've certainly done this in this painting. We have all of the servants behind the figures, bringing in the food and carrying things. We have what appears to be a lively conversation going on. And then, oddly, we have this woman kneeling at Christ's feet in the very center of the painting. But kind of below our sight line, the top of the table, most of the action is occurring above the table. But the woman who is the catalyst for the discussion above the table is kneeling at Christ's feet. Now, when we read the biblical account of this story, a little part of it can be confusing, because they say that she stood behind Christ and was crying and wiping his feet with her hair. And you're like, but how could she do that if she was behind him? Well, back in biblical times, they didn't sit in chairs at the table. The tables were quite low and they reclined on cushions. And they would recline on one elbow and eat with the other hand. And so his feet would have actually been behind him because he'd have been laying down in a reclined position. That was how they sat at the table. So that makes sense. Now, as you've noticed, there are 2 painters for this work, and that's because painters in this period worked within workshops. And Rubens was the master painter, and he had a workshop, and Van Dyck was his assistant. And we know that both of them worked on this painting. We can't tell who exactly painted what because Van Dyck was so skilled at mimicking Rubens' work. We have the whole painting done by the 2 of them. Now, Rubens was influenced by time that he spent in Italy. He went to Italy to learn more and to gain knowledge and to see the masterpieces of the High Renaissance artists. He didn't want to be them. He wanted to be a Baroque painter, but there was much to be learned in Rome, and so he traveled there. And he was exposed to Michelangelo and Titian. Those were the 2 that he really resonated with. And so in this painting, we see that influence. We see Titian's use of color in this painting, the deep, beautiful colors, and we see the sculptural integrity of the figures and their kind of massive size and muscular frames that are reflective of Michelangelo's influence. And again, we have this Baroque tool of moving all the action into the front of the frame, that everything is in the foreground, and it creates more of a sense of immediacy. The lighting is stark. We have a lot of darkness on the right side of the painting, where the black just kind of frames Christ and the disciples, so they just stand against it. And on the left-hand side, we have far more color and movement and light. The woman in the painting is kind of below the action, and yet she is the catalyst. The white tablecloth draws a line through the painting and sort of frames her and sets her apart between the two men, Simon and Jesus, and the table, kind of frame her in. We're not told her name, just that she was a sinful woman, which I find really harsh. In the New Testament, we frequently didn't learn women's names. There's the woman caught in the act of adultery, the Samaritan woman, the woman at the well, whatever. They're just given in terms of their story and are not named. And that was true of this woman. Now, Rubens has conceived of the painting as a conflict between the Pharisees and Jesus, and he has actually set the entire work up, framed the painting to highlight the conflict. And he wants us to see the world of the Pharisees being dominated by wealth and material goods. We see the way they're dressed. There's fur on some of their cloaks. They're very well off. And in terms of their religious dogmatism. And then on the right-hand side, we have Christ and his disciples, kind of a scruffier looking band over there, and their values of love, charity, mercy, grace, those kind of attributes. And Rubens was attempting to picture these two conflicting ideologies against each other as they sit against this, around this table. You can actually, if you put one hand up and cover the left-hand side of the painting, right where that window ends, you have one painting. And then if you cover up the right side, you have a totally different painting and a different feel. And it's like he's taken two separate paintings and shoved them together. And that was a very intentional use of the structure of the painting to tell the story and to visually clue us into the conflict that exists between the Pharisees and religious leaders of Jesus's time and Jesus. So the conflict is playing out in the very structure of the painting. The left side, we've got swirls of color and broken lines and tension, and you almost feel like some of the servants may dump something on somebody. A quick note on the servants. Toward the back, there's one of the servants is holding a platter high in the air, and it has a peacock in it. Peacocks are a symbol of immortality or everlasting life. They were originally that in Greek and Roman times, and then early Christians adopted that symbol and they put it in some of the earliest Christian paintings we have will have a symbol of a peacock to signify everlasting life. And so we have the peacock there in the back. But getting back to the Pharisees, if we look at them, we have that first Pharisee sitting in the blue, just right opposite Christ, who we assume to be Simon. His face, when I look at him, he appears to be intrigued and curious. He's invited Christ to his home, so there's a certain level of curiosity. He hasn't gone so far as to extend common courtesies to Christ, to wash his face, kiss him in greeting. He doesn't want to appear to give Christ his full endorsement. I've had this man to my house. More, I'm still taking my time in evaluating you. And so we have Simon there. But when you move over to the next two seated Pharisees, they've already passed judgment. They've decided this Jesus is not all right with them. They appear angry and they look like they're plotting together as they sit at the table. The man in the middle of the two groups just looks smug to me. He just looks like I'm here for the drama and watching this play out, and who are these fishermen we have at the table? And he just looks smug. There's also a fifth Pharisee kind of in the back who's got on glasses, who's leaning over and watching everything play out. Then when you look closely on the other side, the disciples are kind of an odd mix, but they're sitting with Christ. One of them is just staring out at us, the viewer, it feels like. And the other ones are watching Christ, watching what the woman's doing, listening for the explanation of what's going on. So you have the disciples sitting there next to Christ. And that's basically the things we want to pay attention to in the painting. Oh, I didn't talk about the woman's clothing too much. It was generally assumed, although the New Testament account doesn't tell us this, that her sin was sexual, that she was a fallen woman, if you use that kind of terminology. And they denote that to us by having her dress falling off her shoulder and revealing part of her breast. And so we want to get the impression of maybe not a prostitute, but a woman who has fallen sexually. And that all of these men know this about her. She's known in their community as the fallen woman. And so she's there kissing Christ's foot and wiping his foot with her hair. I'm going to read the biblical account, and it's from Luke 7, verses 36 through 50. And this is out of the NIV version. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. And as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner." Jesus answered him, "Simon, I have something to tell you." "Tell me, teacher," he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. As neither of them had the money to pay him back, he forgave the debts of both. Now which of them will love him more? Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven." "You have judged correctly," Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little." Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." As we move into contemplating the theological implications of this painting, I invite you to carefully consider Simon and the woman. Simon's actions in the story are just so human. He has an elevated opinion of himself as a Pharisee, particularly when he compares himself to the woman. He's living a godly life. He's attending the temple. He's keeping the law. He's a Pharisee, for goodness sake. And he shouldn't be associated with or have to deal with this riffraff over here. That's Simon. It's just so human for people to have those kind of responses. The danger for us as we consider this painting is to fall into the same trap as Simon. We can see his error. We know what Jesus is going to say. We see it coming. And we're convinced that we're not like him, that we wouldn't have responded as he did. So we judge and condemn Simon in much the same way he judges and condemns the woman. We know that Christ reprimanded Simon for his arrogance, but we fail to see the trap, that we judge Simon with that same arrogance. I would venture that all of us have Simon moments. We judge someone, we categorize them by their sin, and we kind of write them off thinking certainly they'll never make it into God's kingdom. Or I don't want to have them sitting next to me at church. Whatever it is, whatever that sin, or maybe it's pride, or whatever the thing that ticks with you that you go, that's the sin that really makes God mad. We fall into the same trap as Simon. And I don't think any of us can claim that we've never done that. We've never been judgmental, because those are the people that will be in God's kingdom. I would venture that all of humanity has committed Simon's sin of pride, and they've been judgmental and dismissive of those they consider less. This woman has been so harshly labeled by her society, and yet Christ has elevated her to being our role model. She entered a place she knew she would be viewed with scorn to seek forgiveness. She brought expensive perfume to clean Christ's feet, expensive enough that it was a huge sacrifice for her to part with the perfume. She shed tears of remorse and expressed pure love for Christ. And Christ stands with her, not with the religious leaders. He doesn't just give her forgiveness that she's seeking. He elevates her in front of all those who are gathered, praising her actions, her motive, and her heart while condemning Simon's. Christ once again turns all the societal norms upside down and draws our attention to what God truly values, not our puffed up practice of religion, but a simple, contrite heart that loves. So as we consider this painting, we have to ask ourselves, if we value the same thing Christ values, do we belong on the left or on the right of this painting? Are we tied more tightly to religious dogma when dealing with those society has labeled as a sinner? Or do we operate as Christ does from a place of love, grace, and mercy, and see another human created in God's image, and that there is someone who needs someone to stand with them, and we can be that person who can stand with them? I hope today you'll have some quiet moments to be able to contemplate this painting further and the questions that it raises about our own hearts. I know I plan to look more deeply at myself to uproot the Simon tendencies that I might be harboring. And I think all of us on a regular basis could stand that kind of a heart check. Father, I pray that you open our eyes to our blind spots, to those areas where we slide so easily into the role of the Pharisee, where we assume your role as judge. Instead, teach us to see with your heart, to extend grace, understanding, and mercy to those who are trapped, and to those who have been labeled by their failings. Show mercy to us. Forgive us our pride. Teach us to love as this woman loved, to sacrifice as she sacrificed, and to approach you with love that everyone can see.